Mark Few is riding Ryan Nembhard and Nolan Hickman in the early going this season. Will those two be able to sustain nearly 40 minutes per game of playing time, or is something going to have to change?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Gametime. Folks, download the Gametime app, create an account, and use that promo code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Happy Monday, folks. Happy post-feast week. Happy USC week for Gonzaga, as they will end up taking on the Trojans on Saturday in Las Vegas. Today is Mailbag Monday. We're going to discuss a handful of listener-submitted questions coming throughout the week before we, of course, preview Bakersfield for Tuesday's show and then continue the week getting ready for that USC game. This is a reminder for most of you, but folks who want to get involved in Mailbag Monday, there are a handful of ways to do so. You can email me at andypatton013@gmail.com. You can reach out to me on Twitter as well. But the best way right now is to join our Discord channel. Locked On Zags Discord channel. It is completely free. There is a link in the show notes, whether you're watching on YouTube or checking the show out on your preferred podcast platform. Click the link. You'll be invited in. It is literally that simple. Close to 300 folks in there. Lively conversation throughout basketball games for Gonzaga men's and women's. It's also a dedicated channel to submit your mailbag questions. You can see what other questions have been submitted as well, so you make sure you're not overlapping with some of those questions. All right, we're going to get right into it. Speaking of overlapping questions, Christian via Gmail, 707_Zag on Discord, and Nansert71633 on Discord as well. All asked a variety of basically the same question, asking about whether Nembhard and Hickman, and to an extent Dusty Stromer, all playing 40 minutes against UCLA. They talked about that, talked about what the plan is for guard depth this season, whether the added minutes are impacting Nembhard's performance on the floor, and if Few is starting to lock down that rotation early. So let's talk about it. Ryan Nembhard, Nolan Hickman, Dusty Stromer all played 40 minutes against UCLA. Third game of a back-to-back, evening game, and those dudes played literally every single minute. Of course, there was some foul trouble in the front court, which kind of resulted in a wonkier bench than usual. We'll talk about it a little bit. I think that trying to glean a lot of information about Gonzaga's future rotation based on that game is kind of silly. That game was an anomaly in so many ways. Again, third of a back-to-back, significant foul trouble early. I just think it wasn't a game that necessarily taught us a lot regarding the Gonzaga rotation. Taught us a lot about other things about Gonzaga, but not in particular with that rotation stuff. Ryan Nembhard cannot play 40 minutes every single game. I hope Mark Few knows that, sincerely, because that seems to be the plan right now. And it will not be the plan in every game. It will not be the plan on Tuesday against Bakersfield. I would be willing to bet significant amounts of whatever you may be interested in that Ryan Nembhard is not going to play 40 minutes against Bakersfield on Tuesday evening. It's not going to happen. Ideally, it's because Gonzaga gets out to a big enough lead that they don't need him to play the last 8 minutes of the game. Ideally, they're a big enough lead at halftime that Mark Few feels comfortable resting him in the first half and the second half. Same with Nolan Hickman. Same with Dusty Stromer. Ideally, all three of those guys are under 35, 32 minutes. Even for those guys in that game against Bakersfield. But against USC, Ryan Nembhard might play a full 40. Against USC, USC's got a really incredibly talented backcourt with top freshman Isaiah Collier, with returnee Boogie Ellis, who averaged about 18 points per game last year. I think he's up over that right now so far for the Trojans. So, they might play the whole game there. And frankly, the issue is fairly simple. Steele Venters got hurt and is out for the entire year. That's the number one thing. They did not expect that to happen. They plan to have a 4-guard rotation with Venters alongside Stromer, Hickman, and Nembhard. They don't have Venters. They have a 3-guard rotation because of thing two, which is that Luka Krajnovic arrived on campus in early September. He's an international student. He comes over not familiar with college basketball, the speed of the game, the style of the game, not particularly familiar with, the United States and the whatever other barriers there may be of just being an international student, whether it's language, whether it's just various communication things and just understanding the culture, being homesick, all that stuff. I think Luka Krajnovic is an incredibly talented basketball player. And I think he's proven he is capable of helping this team this season. But he's barely been here 2-3 months. He just got here. And I think expecting him to fully immerse into the lineup and rotation in a way where he can contribute against, good defensive teams like UCLA or just good teams, period, like Gonzaga played against Syracuse and, of course, against Purdue. He's just probably not there yet. I think there's a good chance he gets there. And I think the long-term answer for Gonzaga this season in terms of how to deal with this lack of depth in the backcourt and the immense amount of minutes that are being put on Nembhard and Hickman and Stromer is Luka. I mean, he is the answer to this question, in part because there's not really another answer. Jun Seok-Yeo is not a 2. He can play the 3. He can play the 4, I think. We've kind of seen him there in spurts. The Zags have so much front court depth. They don't really need him to play the 4, but I think that's a position he's capable of contributing. And certainly I think he's capable of contributing at the 3. We've seen, the highs and lows with Yo early in the season, as you kind of expect to do with a young player who doesn't have a lot of Division I college basketball experience, but he's not really a 2. So the answer is Luka. That is the answer for Gonzaga. They need him to be able to contribute, and they need him to contribute sooner than I expect Mark Few wanted to ask him to do so. A freshman joining the team in September was probably expected. I don't think they ever had the anticipation of Luka redshirting necessarily, but they weren't expecting him to be a rotation piece. And you can see that in the fact that Mark Few is not treating him like a rotation piece, but Hickman has fallen off in each of the last 2 seasons towards the end of the year. If you ride the heck out of him for 35, 38, 40 minutes a game, it's going to happen again. And to answer the other part of this question about Nembhard's turnovers and various other things, I think there's a variety of factors. I don't think that we can point to him having some turnover issues, particularly in the second half against UCLA, as entirely being related to fatigue. But let's be honest, 3rd game in a row, played a bunch of minutes against Purdue, bunch of minutes against Syracuse. No, he's not impervious to being tired. He's not impervious to, he's a young man and certainly in incredible shape, but that's just really hard to do. And so I do think that it is likely playing a factor. But again, Gonzaga's not going to play 3 games in 3 days again. They get in the NCAA tournament, they're going to have to play, multiple games in the same week, 2 games in 3 days, that kind of situation. But you hope by then Krajnovic is capable of giving you more minutes and Nembhard doesn't have to play as much. But it's an unfortunate situation that came together with the Venters injury, with just the offseason as a whole not really lending to Gonzaga having as much depth in the backcourt as they wanted, and then the Steele injury. And I think that the rotation is not set. The rotation is going to change throughout the season. Last year, they were tinkering with the rotation into the WCC slate. I think they'll continue to tinker with this rotation here. It is far from set in my mind, but at the end of the day, it's either more minutes for Luka or those guys are going to play a whole bunch going forward this season. Next question here before we move on. AK Zag on Discord. Simple question. Is the defense sustainable? Kinda. That's a very broad question. I don't know how to fully answer it in depth. It's just because of the broadness of the question, but obviously the team's depth is a concern for me. And if you're going to want to run half-court traps and full-court presses, frankly, you can't do that if you only have 3 guards you're willing to play. If they're not willing to play Luka Krajnovic 12, 15, 18 minutes a game, I don't think they can run full-court presses with Dusty Stromer at the front because he's going to get gassed. Yes, they could use Yo in some lineups there at 3. They could run more of those 3 big lineups, but they're not going to do full court press with the 3 big lineups. It's just not going to happen. They don't have the personnel to run that. So I think the defense is going to continue to be good in the sense that the active hands we see from them in the half court, the way that they're just stylistically, the way that they play, they take more chances, they take more risks, they make more things happen than last year's defense, but that is going to lend to more mistakes. The more risk you take on defense, trying to intercept passes, trying to get in the passing lanes, knocking the ball loose, overextending your hands, is going to lead to more turnovers, more fast breaks, more transition opportunities, but it also leads to mistakes. A guy backdoor cuts on you right when you try to steal a pass and he gets an easy lay-in. You commit more fouls because you're trying to steal, trying to take the ball more. You end up having to sit in the first half because of foul trouble. That's the trade-off that you make with the more aggressive anticipatory defense, which is what we've seen from Gonzaga so far. So is the defense sustainable? I don't know. It will vary team by team. They will certainly adjust their defensive style in those matchups as well. But ultimately, I think we're going to see a defense that tries to get more takeaways, and that's going to be more fun. But we're also going to see them with those highs and lows. We're going to see some games where the defense doesn't look nearly as good as it has up to this point. Well, folks, the Big 12 is back in the news, reportedly planning to vote on Gonzaga as soon as this week, although it is unclear if they actually have the votes to pass Gonzaga through. We're going to discuss that. But first, we got to talk about the Zags versus USC game in Las Vegas coming up this weekend, one of the must-watch games of the entire season. And if you're hoping to make a last-minute trip to join me and my dad in Sin City this weekend watching that game, I've got good news. You are in luck with Gametime, the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, theater events that are near you. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the best price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to the next big event. And thankfully, Gametime has got you covered. They have deals on last-minute tickets right up to the start of the event, an hour before it starts. If you're that desperate to get to Gonzaga USC, you can find those tickets at the last possible minute. It's the place to find last-minute seats, and you take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. So, folks, download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, I want to thank all of you for making Locked On Zags your first listen, or of course, your first watch of the day. Shout out to those everyday listeners checking the show out on YouTube. Shout out to those of you on the Discord channel as well. And folks, I want to remind you about Locked On's new initiative. They've launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. If you go to Locked On Sports today on YouTube, it is streaming 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows. You'll see Locked On College Basketball on there every single day. You will see Locked On Zags on there as well when there is big storylines about Gonzaga in the national news. So go to Locked On Sports today on YouTube, subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, folks, more questions here as we get through Mailbag Monday before we get to that Gonzaga home game against Bakersfield on Tuesday, and of course the big one against the Trojans of USC on Saturday in the desert. This question here comes from Jeff via Gmail. Jeff says, the Houston Chronicle reported that during the Big 12 meeting this week, adding Gonzaga will be the main topic and that there may be an actual vote. At the same time, if the sources are correct, it appears that there may currently be like 7 yes votes for adding Gonzaga, but that's still not enough. If there are not enough yes votes to add Gonzaga, do you think Brett Yormark would even call a vote? I have no idea what Brett Yormark's going to do. To be honest, I can answer great questions about what a move to the Big 12 would mean for Gonzaga, what it would mean for their rivalries, what it would mean for the WCC, what it would mean for Gonzaga's other sports. But in terms of trying to predict what Brett Yormark and the Big 12 is going to do, if I knew, I swear to you, I would tell you I would also probably be a millionaire because I would be able to see the future. Really tough to know here. Having said that, I don't see why Brett Yormark would host an official vote and waste the AD and president's time if he didn't think he had the numbers. Or put another way, if he wasn't absolutely 100% certain that he had the numbers. So my answer would be no, I don't think there's going to be a vote unless they think they have the numbers. Right now, it does sound like there is enough opposition from certain programs who are more willing to wait to see if Gonzaga gets a little bit more desperate and will take less money. Maybe they're waiting because they want to see what the finances look like once the 4 corner schools come in with Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah, which frankly all makes sense. Like there are some schools in the Big 12 that are never going to vote yes on Gonzaga because they just want them there. And that's probably not going to change. But for schools who are like, hey, we might be interested in Gonzaga, this isn't necessarily something we're opposed to, but let's figure out what we have. Like we just added 4 schools. We just added 4 schools this year. We're adding 4 schools next year. 2 schools are out the door next year. Like, let's wait until the dust settles before we make any commitments. I don't blame schools for saying that. Quite honestly, I don't. The only reason I think that those programs could be swung in the other direction, or the argument that I think Yormark might be working on, is to convince them that they need to move now on Gonzaga or risk losing them to another conference. And right now, that does not appear imminent. We'll talk about the Big East momentarily. We got another question about them. Certainly the lawsuit litigation that has happened with the Pac-2 with Washington State and Oregon State should allow them to create some kind of hybrid conference with the Mountain West. I could see Gonzaga getting a potential invite there, but I don't think Gonzaga is going to jump to that conference if they think there's any chance the Big 12 will take them. Like, I don't think that gives them as much leverage. The Big East would give them leverage. If the Big 12 feels like, hey, Gonzaga's going to go to the Big East if we don't take them in the next month, 6 months, whatever, that might, be the jolt, the lightning bolt that some of those Big 12 schools need to say, okay, yes, we'll vote them in now. We're ready to do that. But until that happens, I could see why a lot of Big 12 schools who are maybe not opposed to Gonzaga in perpetuity, who are just like, well, what's the rush? Why force this now if Gonzaga is going to continue to wait for us to invite them? And they, like I said, they have a fair point until Gonzaga has a little bit more leverage. Next question here also comes from Jeff via Gmail. Jeff says, in the past, geography has played a major role in ending the potential for Gonzaga to move to a conference like the Big East. Now, does geography really matter much anymore with conference realignment? Yeah, I think this is the 10th time I have now received this question on a Mailbag Monday. Does geography matter in conference realignment? And frankly, no. I mean, we can see it with our eyes, right? That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter anymore. Stanford and Cal didn't have much choice when they went to the ACC. People like to use that one as like the real dunk, like, Stanford and Cal in the ACC is like proof of this. And it's like, don't blame them. Like, blame the fact that UCLA, USC, Oregon, and Washington jumped to the Big Ten. The four corner schools got nervous and jumped to the Big 12. Like, Stanford and Cal didn't have a choice. They had to go somewhere. And the ACC was the only conference that wanted them. So I don't blame them for that. But Stanford and Cal being in the ACC, being in the same conference as Virginia and North Carolina and Pitt and everybody else in the ACC is proof that geography is just completely irrelevant. It doesn't matter at all. The Big East inviting Gonzaga, were it to happen, would create a situation where Gonzaga would be on a huge island. At least Stanford and Cal have each other. Gonzaga would be on an island. And there's just not a logical West Coast partner to be a travel partner with Gonzaga into the Big East. There's not. It's not St. Mary's. The school is not big enough, is not set up in a way to join the Big East Conference. They're not. The rest of the WCC isn't good enough. San Francisco and Santa Clara might get looks, but they are not good enough to be Big East teams. They haven't proven it consistently enough to be in that conversation. There's nobody in the WAC that is in that conversation. There's just not a logical fit for Gonzaga to jump with to the Big East. Dayton or St. Louis in the A10 are very logical picks for the Big East if they are looking to expand with multiple schools, but they're not close to Gonzaga. Neither of those schools would make much sense for Gonzaga. So geography doesn't matter in the grand scheme of conference realignment, but it might matter to the Big East. And it could be enough of a hurdle for them to consider it. My thought, and I've said this on a recent podcast, and I'll say it again here, is that the Big East, when they start their negotiations, which reportedly they already have, their contract runs out in 2025. When they start their new media contract negotiations, Gonzaga's TV power number is incredibly high. The just kind of influence that they have over ESPN and Fox and whoever else is going to be involved in these media negotiations with the Big East, Gonzaga has power. They have sway. They have something that the Big East wants in order to leverage for a better media rights deal. Gonzaga would make more money for the Big East and the Big East member schools if they were to join the conference. Some of that money would be mitigated by extra travel costs for these teams having to travel across the country. They would only have to do it once a year. The issue is more on the Gonzaga side of them having to do it all of the flip in time. And of course, the other elements of other sports. Is baseball going to join the Big East? That's going to be a mess travel-wise for them. It's fun. I like Big East baseball. I think it's a fun move, but that's really, really hard on a program like the baseball program. What does it mean for the soccers, the tennises, the track and fields? All of that stuff are things that would still need to be figured out. Geography matters. But at the end of the day, if the Big East wants this to happen, if their media partners want this to happen, they're going to get that invite. Again, Gonzaga might still take the Big 12 if that pushes the Big 12 into action, which I think it might. But I don't think that at the end of the day, geography would be a big enough hurdle to prevent the Big East from accepting Gonzaga if they felt it was the right thing to do. Final question here before we move on to our third and final segment comes from 707_AZAG on Discord, who says, the Zags have not been an impressive free throw shooting team over the last few seasons. You can say that again. Performance this season has been erratic. Since this is a liability, particularly in low scoring games, what do you think should be done to improve free throw performance? I don't know what Mark Few does to work on free throw performance. I'm not a coach. I'm a podcaster and an analyst. That's a hard word to say for some reason. So I don't really know what needs to be worked on to improve free throw performance. Practice, I would imagine, practicing when fatigued. Again, I'm not trying to UCLA, third game, back-to-back, super physical opponent, late night game. Them shooting poorly from the free throw line in that game was frustrating and almost cost them the game. But I don't think it's some huge sign that like the sky is falling for Gonzaga as a free throw shooting team. I also don't think it is an indication that they're going to be terrible all season long. But again, this is a trend for Gonzaga. This is not the first bad free throw shooting game they have had. Some guys, it might be mental. Anton Watson cashed 3 threes, had 32 points, but still only went 1 of 4 from the free throw line against UCLA. Seems to me like he has a mental block in terms of his scoring abilities outside of the free throw line and what he does at the free throw line. I don't know his mental health. I'm not going to sit here and speculate on it too much, but if it's a mental thing for Anton, practice probably isn't necessarily going to fix it. So I don't know what the fix is. I don't know what Mark Few is or isn't doing that is causing problems for this team from the free throw line, but it is certainly an area that you'd like to see them shore up, especially before they get into the NCAA tournament. We're going to close out the show discussing Santa Clara's strong start to the season and the Lady Zags and what's going on with their team after this loss to Louisville. But first, I want to tell you all about today's sponsor, FanDuel. Score early this college basketball season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. And if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, now is the perfect time to get in on the action. The app is insanely easy to use, folks. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Right now, the Zags currently have 800-1 odds to make the Final Four. So if you're feeling spicy and you got $24 burning a hole in your pocket, you could net yourself $200 that third week in March if the Zags are still dancing with the Final Four. So folks, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the college basketball season. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. All right, folks, closing out the show with a couple more questions here for mailbag. This one was asked by both Christian and Jeff via Gmail. They both asked if Santa Clara could be a bigger threat to Gonzaga in the WCC than St. Mary's. Jeff also asked if the WCC could get 3 bids with these 3 schools. The answer is no. St. Mary's is a better team than Santa Clara. I'm sticking with that. I know St. Mary's has had a very rough start to the season. There's nobody's debating that. The loss to Weber State was not good. Loss to San Diego State was not good. But Santa Clara, despite having an undefeated start for a while, they were 6-0. They beat Oregon. They went into the championship of the Emerald Coast Classic, their MTE, and got obliterated by Ohio State. 86-56 was the final score here. The Broncos absolutely crushed by a Buckeyes team that probably won't be in the top 25. They might sneak into the top 25. We'll see. A borderline top 25 team in Ohio State, a team that was projected to finish in the middle of the pack of the Big Ten, and absolutely crushed Santa Clara. Yes, Santa Clara did get a win over Oregon. You're never going to take that win away from the Broncos, but it is worth acknowledging that Oregon lost N'Faly Dante, their starting center, for 8 weeks. They lost Nathan Biddle, their backup center, for 4 weeks. Both those guys were out in that game. It's basically an Oregon team playing without their entire front court. Santa Clara still won. They won by 8. I think the Broncos are a sneaky good team, but right now KenPom doesn't even have them 3rd in the WCC. They have them 5th behind Gonzaga and St. Mary's, and then San Francisco is 3rd and LMU is 4th. Santa Clara is 125th at KenPom right now. This is after the loss to Ohio State. No, I don't think they're a threat to St. Mary's. St. Mary's is a better team. I think St. Mary's is going to show that. I don't think they're going to get back in the top 25. I don't think they're necessarily going to go on this monster run, but I think they're better than every other team in the WCC except for Gonzaga. And I think that's ultimately going to be what we see from them going forward this season. And the WCC is not a 3-bid league. In fact, there's a far more likely chance the WCC is a 1-bid lead than even a 2-bid league. I think they're not a terrible chance that St. Mary's ends up finding their way into the big dance as an automatic bid. But I think that there's no way the WCC is a 3-bid league. There's absolutely no chance that San Francisco, LMU, or Santa Clara, none of those teams are going to make the NCAA tournament unless they beat Gonzaga in the regular season. And if they beat Gonzaga in the conference tournament, I should say, if they beat Gonzaga in the conference tournament, then Gonzaga's still going to get a bid. They would get a bid, but St. Mary's, if they're not in the NCAA or if they're not in the conference tournament championship, they're out. There's almost no way they make it out of that. If Santa Clara beats St. Mary's in the conference tournament championship, yeah, there's a decent chance that Gonzaga, assuming they do well in the regular season and just somehow drop a game in the WCC semifinals, then yeah, Santa Clara beats St. Mary's, Santa Clara makes it. I still don't think St. Mary's makes it. I still don't think they would get into the NCAA tournament. So I really don't see this league being particularly close to being a three bid league. And frankly, St. Mary's is going to have to win every single game in the regular season, the WCC season, outside of Gonzaga. And they're probably going to have to beat Gonzaga once. They might even have to beat them twice. The St. Mary's team, they're 58th at KenPom right now. They do not look like an at-large team. They got 2 games coming up very soon. They got Utah tonight. As you're listening to this on Monday, they got Boise State on Friday. They have to win both of them. If they drop one of those games, I don't think that they have really much of a chance at all of getting an automatic bid an auto bid unless they win the WCC tournament. An at-large bid. That's what I'm looking for. I don't think they get an at-large bid unless they win the WCC tournament. And if they beat both Utah and Boise State, those dreams are still kind of alive for them. But frankly, I think we might be looking, unfortunately, at a reality where the WCC is potentially just a one-bid league in 2024. Next question here, another one from Jeff. Jeff says, how impressive has Gonzaga's women's performance been so far in the early season tournament? What do you think the odds are the Lady Zags finishing the non-conference schedule with a record of 12-2 or better? And which team do you think will finish their non-conference schedule with a better record, the men or the women? So this question was submitted a couple days ago. It was submitted before Gonzaga played Louisville in their tournament there, and the Lady Zags got smashed, unfortunately, by the Cardinals, especially in the fourth quarter. It was close. I think it was a 2-point game going into the fourth quarter. Gonzaga and Louisville played similarly in the first quarter. Louisville smashed them in the second quarter. Gonzaga had a good third quarter and then a very bad fourth quarter, ended up losing that game and finishing second in the Betty Chancellor Classic. Lady Zags are now 6-2. So for them to go 12-2, they'd have to win the rest of their non-conference games, which includes number 4 Stanford, includes Arizona and South Dakota State and New Mexico all at home. It also includes 2 true road games at Cal and at Rice. They're not going to go 12-2. I don't think they're going to beat Stanford. Stanford is incredibly good. They have beat them in the past. They are also at home. So maybe, I don't want to say it's impossible, but I'm not expecting a win there. And frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if they drop one of those other games as well. They scheduled really well this non-conference. It's not a slight on them to project that they don't win all the rest of their games, but I think that there's a chance they go 11-3 in the non-conference, with their only other loss being that Stanford game and getting wins over Arizona, South Dakota State, New Mexico, Rice, and Cal. And if they go 11-3, I think that probably ties them with the men. I think the men are probably going to go 11-3 in the non-conference. The men have USC, San Diego State. Those are both games they should win, but games that are not guaranteed victories by any stretch of the imagination. They also have UConn and Kentucky. Kentucky, true road game, of course, back out in February. UConn is at the Battle in Seattle at the Climate Pledge Arena in a couple of weeks. I don't think the Zags go 4-0 in those 4 games. I think 3-1 is absolutely possible for this Gonzaga team, but I also think 2-2 is too. And if they go 2-2, they win the rest of their non-conference games, which they should. The only other even remote competition really is Washington on the road, which Washington hasn't looked that good. It's still a true road game, at least for the Zags there. But ultimately, I think they're both going to finish, both the women's team and the men's team are probably going to finish 11-3. That's kind of the range that I think they're both in at this point right now. I also did get a question from a listener basically asking for my keys to victory against USC. But for those of you everyday listeners, for those of you who listen to the show on a regular basis, you know that we do our 5 keys for opponents like that on either the day before or the day of the game. In this case, they're planning to come out on Thursday's show. So check that out for the 5 keys to defeat the USC Trojans, what that matchup's going to look like. We'll probably do 2 full shows dedicated to that USC game on Thursday and Friday. So definitely check back in your feed to make sure you listen to those there. But that's going to wrap us up for today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. I want to thank all of you for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Don't forget to join us in the Discord channel if you want more quicker updates on USC. You want to talk to me and everybody else about that game, join the Discord channel. You can start asking questions in there right away, and we'll have ourselves some 24/7 conversation about the Zags. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, as always, go Zags.